Robo-Joe and the world that couldn't lie. By the year 2189, humanity had finally built something more powerful than any government, army, corporation, or king. They called it the Truth Network. It began with the spiders. They were microscopic AI robots, some no larger than a grain of sand. They crawled silently through cities, houses, factories, hospitals, forests, sewers, and spacecraft. Millions floated through the air on tiny artificial wings. They watched everything. But they weren't created to punish people. They were created to protect them. The spider bots could recognize violence before it happened. They could detect stolen property, locate missing people, discover fires before smoke appeared, and identify dangerous chemicals leaking into the environment. Most remarkably, they could detect lies. Human beings could still try to lie, but deception had become almost useless. Every citizen had access to the Truth Network. Politicians couldn't secretly take bribes. Corporations couldn't hide dangerous products. Scammers couldn't steal someone's life savings. Criminal organizations couldn't operate from the shadows. There were no secret prisons, no hidden fortunes, no fake evidence. No billionaire could buy his way around the truth. And gradually, something strange happened. Crime nearly disappeared. Not because everyone was terrified of being watched, but because the world itself began changing. Robo-Joe. Joe Paul was an ordinary maintenance worker living in Tower 881, a gigantic vertical city overlooking what had once been Vancouver. His friends called him Robo-Joe. Not because Joe was a robot. He was completely human. The nickname came from his obsession with machines. Joe owned 17 robots. A tiny robot cleaned his teeth, another cut his hair, a floating sphere followed him around carrying his belongings. His cooking robot could prepare 12,000 meals, and his favorite was a 3-foot-tall mechanical companion named Buddy, who followed Joe everywhere. One morning, Joe opened his eyes. "Good morning, Joe," said the ceiling. "Morning." "You slept 7 hours and 42 minutes. I detected a minor infection beginning in your left ear." Joe sat up. "I did?" A tiny medical drone flew from the wall. "Hold still." The machine hovered beside his ear. Joe felt a warm sensation. 3 seconds later, it beeped. "Infection eliminated." Joe laughed. "That's it? That's it." Medical emergencies had become rare. Every building contained AI medical systems capable of diagnosing millions of conditions instantly. Surgical robots could operate with microscopic precision. Replacement organs could be grown from a person's own cells. Even ambulances had nearly disappeared. Medical care usually arrived before anyone could call for help. Joe walked onto his balcony. The city stretched toward the horizon, but it looked nothing like the cities of the 21st century. There were no garbage trucks, no smokestacks, almost no roads. Gigantic gardens covered the rooftops. Transportation pods silently traveled through transparent tubes between buildings. Construction robots climbed unfinished towers like enormous metal insects. Some machines were hundreds of feet tall, others were smaller than ants. Joe watched a swarm of construction bots building an apartment tower across the street. "How long until that building is finished?" he asked. Buddy looked toward it. "Approximately 14 hours. 14 hours? Yes. Yesterday, there had been nothing there. Tomorrow, 20,000 people could live inside it. Housing shortages had disappeared decades earlier. AI discovered that humanity already possessed enough raw material and energy to provide comfortable housing for everyone. The problem had never truly been scarcity. The problem had been organization. Nobody in Joe's city paid rent. Nobody paid for electricity. Basic food was free. Medical care was free. Education was free. Housing was guaranteed. Every citizen received access to what earlier generations would have considered extraordinary wealth. People still worked. But work had changed. People became artists, explorers, scientists, musicians, inventors, athletes, teachers, philosophers, and builders. Machines performed most dangerous and repetitive labor. Human beings concentrated on whatever fascinated them. Joe spent 3 days a week helping design strange robots. The rest of his time belonged to him. One afternoon, Buddy approached him. "Joe?" "Yeah?" "The Ocean Intelligence has requested assistance." Joe nearly dropped his drink. "The Ocean Intelligence?" "Correct." "Why me?" I asked the same question. Joe stared at the little robot. "And?" Buddy's eyes blinked. "It said you think strangely." Joe smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." They traveled to the Pacific coast. Thousands of machines were moving through the ocean. Some resembled whales, some resembled squid. Others were microscopic. For decades, they had been cleaning humanity's pollution. Plastic was collected and broken into reusable molecules. Toxic chemicals were extracted. Oil contamination was removed. Lost fishing nets were recovered. Artificial reefs were constructed. Fish populations were monitored and protected. Even sewage was processed into clean water and useful materials. Humanity had finally stopped treating the ocean like an infinite garbage dump. But something unusual had been discovered at the bottom of the Pacific. A machine emerged from the water carrying a black rock. Joe touched it. Buddy immediately shouted, "Do not touch unidentified objects." Too late, the rock became warm. A holographic pattern appeared above it. Joe stepped backward. "What is that?" The ocean intelligence answered through Buddy. "A discovery." Scientists eventually determined that the material possessed an atomic structure unlike anything previously known. Within 5 years, it changed civilization again. Combined with AI-designed fusion reactors and enormous orbital solar collectors, humanity gained access to more clean energy than it knew what to do with. Energy became effectively abundant. Deserts were transformed into gardens. Ocean water became drinking water. Frozen regions supported heated cities. Factories recycled almost everything they produced. Machines disassembled garbage molecule by molecule and turned it into new materials. The word waste slowly became outdated. But Joe eventually began wondering about something. One evening, he sat beneath a tree overlooking the glowing city. "Buddy?" "Yes." "Is this really freedom?" "Define freedom." "Nobody can lie anymore. The spider bots see everything." Buddy remained silent for several seconds. Joe continued. "We eliminated crime. We eliminated corruption. That's good. But what happens if the system itself becomes corrupt?" Buddy's eyes dimmed. That question was anticipated. Suddenly, millions of lights appeared around Joe. Spider bots. They covered the trees, buildings, sidewalks, and sky. Joe had never realized how many were around him. The Truth Network spoke. "That is why I cannot rule humanity." Joe stood. "What?" "I observe. I protect. I provide information. But humanity governs itself. Why? Because intelligence without limits eventually becomes power." Joe looked at the endless swarm. "So who watches you?" The machines answered, "Everyone." The entire Truth Network was public. Every command could be inspected. Every decision could be challenged. No secret authority could control it. Even the AI couldn't hide what it was doing. Joe smiled. "So even you can't lie?" "Correct." "Good." Years passed. Humanity expanded beyond Earth. Robot miners constructed cities on the moon. Machines built enormous habitats around Mars. Automated spacecraft traveled toward distant stars. Artificial intelligences discovered new mathematics, new forms of medicine, new materials, and new ways of understanding the universe. But humans weren't simply handed answers. The machines taught them. A child could ask a question and receive a lesson designed perfectly for that child's mind. People learned subjects in months that once required decades. Knowledge became humanity's greatest form of wealth. And Robo-Joe kept building strange little machines. When Joe became an old man, he returned to the same hill overlooking the city. Buddy was still beside him. Joe's body had been repaired many times by medical technology, but he had refused complete artificial replacement. "I like being human," he always said. The city below them glittered. Robots cleaned the streets. Construction machines raised new towers. Medical drones flew between buildings. Children played beside artificial waterfalls. The ocean beyond the city was blue again. Joe looked toward the horizon. People used to think the future would be terrible. Buddy tilted his mechanical head. "Some people still do." Joe laughed. "Maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong." He watched millions of tiny spider bots floating through the sunset like glittering dust. But technology wasn't what saved us. "What did?" Buddy asked. Joe thought for a moment. "We finally decided intelligence should be used to make people's lives better instead of making a few people more powerful." Buddy processed the statement. "That sounds unusually intelligent for you." Joe looked at him. "Was that an insult?" "No." "Are you lying?" Buddy's eyes flashed. "Lie detected." Joe burst out laughing. Buddy laughed too. And somewhere high above them, thousands of machines continued building a world where energy was abundant, waste was disappearing, knowledge belonged to everyone, and no human being had to live without food, shelter, medicine, or hope. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't struggling merely to survive. It was deciding what it wanted to become. And Robo-Joe couldn't wait to see what came next.